This video is brought to you by NordVPN. Negotiations are underway to lay the groundwork for a deal that could see Saudi Arabia formally recognise the State of Israel, becoming the latest and perhaps most significant in a series of Arab states to do so. With the US acting as the mediator between its two allies and with a new view to countering their common foe, Iran, what would a potential deal look like? In this video, we'll take a look at what each country wants, why they want it, and explain why striking a deal will be far from simple. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Talks are still very much behind closed doors, and they involve US officials acting as an intermediary between the Saudis and the Israeli sides. But we do have a good idea of some of the key points that the US, Israel and Saudi Arabia are hoping to achieve. So let's take a look at why each party is interested and what they're hoping to get, starting with Saudi Arabia. The key thing that the Saudi side is hoping to achieve is some kind of security guarantee from the United States. In the Saudi kingdom's ideal world, it would be a mutual defence pact in the vein of NATO's Article 5, meaning that if Saudi Arabia comes under attack, then the US would come to its defence. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is reportedly still distressed by the missile and drone attacks on his country's oil processing facilities in September 2019, which Saudi Arabia and the United States accused Iran of orchestrating, though Iran denied this. Then President Donald Trump said the US was locked and loaded for a potential response, though in the end, the American response was to send more US troops to the region and help bolster Saudi air defences. This left Saudi Arabia somewhat unsatisfied, especially considering the 1980 so-called Carter Doctrine and later Reagan-Collery, that effectively committed the US to the defence of the oil fields of the Persian Gulf. So with that in mind, Saudi Arabia is hoping to secure something more concrete from the US when it comes to its defence. On the subject of defence, Saudi Arabia is also said to be seeking the option of purchasing some of the US's more advanced weapon systems, which it currently doesn't have access to. On top of this, in a bid to protect its energy supply in a post-oil world, Saudi Arabia also wants help from the US on a civilian nuclear power program, which could include enriching uranium on Saudi soil. So that's what Saudi Arabia wants from the US. But what are they hoping to get from Israel in exchange for diplomatic recognition? Well, for starters, normalising ties would open Saudi Arabia up for trade and investment opportunities with Israel that could help the Crown Prince in his efforts to diversify the Saudi economy away from oil. But any normalisation agreement with Israel would have to come with some kind of concession on Palestine, which realistically would fall well short of full statehood for Palestinians, especially considering the current makeup of the Israeli government. As for Israel, it may be the biggest beneficiary of any kind of normalisation deal. It struck a series of deals with Arab states in recent years, but one with Saudi Arabia would arguably be the most significant since the landmark 1978 Camp David Accords with Egypt. Saudi Arabia is the richest and most powerful Gulf state and holds unique weight in the wider Muslim world because it's the site of Islam's two holiest places. As such, normalisation with Saudi Arabia could open the door to deals with Muslim-majority countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh and others. Additionally, Israel and Saudi Arabia share a nemesis in Iran, though Israel sees the threat as more existential. So normalising diplomatic relations would help strengthen the anti-Iran bulwark in the region, something the US is also keen on doing. Another thing that may be on the mind of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is that securing a deal with Saudi Arabia could shift the focus away from domestic issues, like the internal divisions over his highly controversial judicial reforms, as well as help patch things up with the US after the Biden administration's public criticism of the reforms. That brings us on to the US, which is currently acting as a sort of middleman between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but also has a significant stake in the potential deal. Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, has said that a deal would benefit the US in a fundamental way and help it towards its goal of a more integrated, more stable Middle East, in which countries can collaborate on everything from economic to technology to regional security. As we've previously said, bringing Israel and Saudi Arabia together would also help the US in its goal of containing Iran, and could go some way to creating a sort of regional security alliance that counters Iran. On a similar geopolitical level, a landmark deal would allow the US to push back against China's growing status in the region, following Beijing's brokering of a deal to restore diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It may also help the US bring Saudi Arabia back on side after a few difficult years for the relationship, following the 2018 murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, ordered by the Saudi government. One of the US's particular bugbears recently has been Saudi Arabia's voluntary cutting of oil production, which has the downstream effect of keeping US gasoline prices higher than they otherwise may have been. So that's what everyone's hoping to get out of the deal, and in case you hadn't worked it out already, it all makes things very tricky. In the words of Thomas Friedman, a lot of things have to be agreed by a lot of people. Netanyahu's new coalition's hostility to Palestine suggests they won't be willing to cede much ground on the issue for Saudi Arabia. Israeli officials may also be very wary of a deal that develops Saudi Arabia's nuclear energy program, as it could pave the way for the country to develop nuclear weapons. Additionally, any concrete security guarantee and higher tech weaponry for Saudi Arabia would be controversial at home in the US, particularly in Congress, where Saudi Arabia's human rights record has left it deeply unpopular. It's with all this in mind that the Biden administration has been cautious not to build expectations that things will be wrapped up anytime soon. Jake Sullivan told reporters recently that there is still a way to travel with respect to all of the elements of those discussions. One opportunity to push things forward could come at the G20 summit in India in September, if Biden decides to meet one-on-one with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, though officials have so far declined to comment on the prospect. So for now, we'll have to wait and see. Following stories and doing independent journalism often requires a fair bit of travel, from attending the NATO summit in Lithuania or Munich Security Conference to exploring Aldi across Germany or being forced to hang out with fellow Nebula creators. It's all right for some people. What is consistently annoying, though, is the technology. When you need to work from abroad or even just access the services you're used to, it's often way harder than you'd like, requiring endless verification, validation, and authentications. As I'm sure you already know, that's where NordVPN comes into play, helping you connect to the internet wherever you are. Whether that's connecting back at home so your work account doesn't freak out, or connecting to another country from the comfort of your living room to get discounts on your next trip. That's right, very often other countries get cheaper prices for flights, with research finding US consumers pay up to 3 times more. NordVPN are actually currently running a major back-to-school promotion, which means that when you sign up for a 2-year plan, you not only get a massive discount, but you also get an extra 4 months. That's a huge discount if you click our link. Plus, Nord will keep sponsoring TLDR if people click it. We've been told that sometimes when people hear us talk about NordVPN, they open up a tab, start searching, but they don't click our link. I'm certainly glad that they get the service, but you only get the discount and you only support the channel through that link. So if you're trying to improve our journalism by signing up for Nord, use our link when you do, and you'll get their great service at a discount.